It on Tuesday night, but it's such a delight to hear again. It's just such an incredible model for us all, I think, of the figure of a man, a deep man of faith, a deep man of love for his family, and certainly for his patients as well. Now we will hear from Dr. Steve Brown, and I'll just read his bio so you have a better understanding. Stephen Brown is a professor of mechanical engineering at the Catholic University of America, and he is editor of A Reason Open to God on Universities, Education, and Culture, published in 2013. It's a collection of speeches, letters, and addresses by Pope Benedict XVI on the relationship between faith and intellectual life. He received his PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, as you know, and has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the Provost Award for Overall Teaching in 2011. He is associate editor of HVAC&R Research and is a registered professional engineer in the state of Maryland. But most of all, he's a member of a select club of dads of children who are living with Down syndrome or trisomy 21. So, Steve.
So I'd like to begin by thanking Crossroads and the American Bible Society for inviting me to come here. I'm a friend of Angelo Sala, and he asked me to come and speak as a parent. So again, my day job is a professor of engineering, but I'm here to speak as a parent of a child with Down syndrome. He asked me in particular to speak about what it means to accept a child with Down syndrome. And I must say, I'm not sure I'm the right guy to speak on that topic because in fact it's never been it was never a problem for me to accept my son, Carlo, who has Down syndrome. Now, I want to say at the outset that I recognize that as a grace because it's not always true for everyone, including for my wife. She struggled with a lot in the beginning. It's not that I'm better than my wife. It's just, again, a grace. But so I'm here to speak as a dad, and I'm going to do what dads do. I'm going to show you pictures, and I'm going to speak the pictures. But I'm also an engineer, so I'm going to be schematic in doing it. Okay. So I like very much this phrase because I think it sums up in some way what I want to say tonight. And I've taken this from the website of the Friends of Lejeune, where it says, "Before God and men, we bear witness that for us every human being is a person." And again, this is a quote from Lejeune. And so my talk, again, being schematic, I want to make 4 basic points. Because my point is not so much about how to accept a child with Down syndrome, but rather what I've learned about life from living with my son. What I've learned about my other children, about myself, about my wife, about my friends, about everything. And these 4 points: life is gift, limitation, reality, and effective relationships. So, when I was in my mid-20s, I was a graduate student. And like all of us, I'm sure, at different points in our life, there are particular phrases from the Bible that strike us in a particular way. This is one that at this point in my life, I'm struggling with this question of vocation. What is vocation? What is my vocation? And I was living this question in a very detached way, in the sense that it was a very selfish question I was asking, because it wasn't so much about what was my vocation, but it was rather, what should I do? But this is how I understood it at the time. But I stumbled on this phrase in Isaiah, "Your ways are not my ways." And I had no idea what it meant, but it was one that struck me, and I knew there was something there for me. And so I don't know how many years later, I guess probably 15 years later or so, Carlo was born. So this is Carlo. But when I put a picture up here of Carlo, it's not so much that just because he was born that this phrase was somehow answered, but this was true with every birth of my children, right? At every birth. Your ways are not my ways. So what do I want to say here? So when Carlo was born, he was born in 2001, so he's 12 years old, December 2001. And there was, so when he was born, he was my 4th child. I have 6 children. And so by the 4th child, you sort of know the routine, right? They're born and then they do certain things with them and then they give them to the mother and then eventually you go home. But we were there in the hospital, and so he was born, and then at a certain point, the nurse, who was very chatty, was chatting away. She stopped chatting and she was starting to attend to Carlo. And it wasn't very clear to me what she was doing or why she was doing it, but eventually she just sort of wheeled him out of the room. And I knew that I should follow her, so I followed her, and he ended up in the NICU, the Neo-Intensive Care Unit. Had no idea why he was there. They didn't really know either. He was just having problems breathing. And eventually, once you get into the NICU, you can't get out. If you've ever been there, there are very sick babies in there. Carlo was not particularly sick, but he ended up in the NICU. and they won't let you out until you gain back your birth weight, which takes a long time. So anyway, we were stuck in there. And again, we really had no idea what was wrong with him. They had no idea either, really. And about 6 days after his birth, one day a nurse was there, and she said, "You realize they've sent for a blood test?" And my wife said, "Well, why?" And she said, "Well, they suspect he may have Down syndrome." And this was a big shock to my wife in particular. And then the next day, sure enough, they come back with this blood test, and they tell us, in fact, he does have Down syndrome. And then what's amazing at that point is you have the entire mechanism of the state of Maryland goes into action, right? So immediately they usher us into a room where this social worker comes in, and I see lots of clerics in here, so no offense here, but imagine the absolute worst kind of confessional you can imagine, or imagine that they're going to give you the news that your best friend, your spouse, your children have just died. The worst kind of news they could possibly give you. This social worker was there telling us these things. And all that she could do was give us a technical solution. She kept telling us all the problems that he would have in his life and how the state was going to solve them for us. And this was a very non-correspondent thing to me, because I was thinking, why is she doing this? They didn't do this with my other children. For crying out loud, he's my son. But anyway, then at the same time, I had 3 other children that I was dealing with, because my wife was in the hospital for the most part with my son. So I was going back and forth trying to take care of the other children, so often leaving them with friends. And so after this news, I went back to pick up my 3 older children from a good friend of ours. It was the first time I had seen her since this news had arrived, so to speak. And when she first saw me, I picked up my kids at the park. When she saw me, she said, "I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." And I was thinking, why? Why are you so sorry? Because he's my son, for crying out loud. He's born. Why should you be sorry about this? And so these are all just discrete moments. But I'll paint a picture with this in a moment. But also then, when he was probably 3, 4, 5, 6 months old, I don't even remember how old, I was sitting on the couch and my wife was sitting next to me. And my wife, suddenly all of her anger, everything came out. And she asked me, "Why are you not upset?" And again, it's not that I'm better than my wife. And again, as I already said, I recognize this as a grace. It was never for me a problem. It was never for me a problem to accept my son. Because for me, he was a son like all my other sons. And who am I to say how long or how short a life will be? How healthy or how sick a life will be? Or how rich or how poor a life will be? Or how happy or unhappy a life will be? I cannot give myself another moment of life. I can't make myself happy. I can't make myself well. I can't do any of that. So, and what struck me is this is true for all of my children. It's not true just for Carlo. It's not true just for me, but it's true for Marta, Francesco, Veronica, and so on. Again, another phrase that struck me a lot in the Bible when it first came across this is from Jeremiah. "I have loved you with an everlasting love." And this brings me to this point of life is gift. Because we're each a thought of God, in some sense from all eternity, right? We're called into being in love. Life is gift. A direct relationship with the infinite. So I don't determine I don't determine anything, right? It's simply my life has been given to me to be given back. And so if this is true, then how could I not but rejoice at the birth of a child, no matter how wounded he or she might be? And so then the question comes often, this practical question, well, what am I supposed to do? Again, this question of perhaps acceptance. And my wife had this question very strong at the beginning, and she asked a very wise friend of ours, an Italian man, and he said something like this. He said, "Love him as he is, and he will be who he is." To me, this is the truest judgment you can make on his life, right? Rather than living all of the ideas, all the projects, all the dreams that you may have for your child, rather it's to love him as he is, and he will be who he is, right? This eternal thought of God, if you will, brought into being in love. Well, again, this phrase from Lejeune again. "Before God and man, we bear witness to us that for us every human being is a person." Okay, so my second point on limitation. So often when when we look at ourselves, when we look at our children, when we look at our spouses, what defines us is our limitation. And it's true also, perhaps in a more pronounced way, with children of disabilities, such as Down syndrome. So, this is a picture of Carlo playing soccer here when we were on sabbatical 5 or 6 years ago in Italy. But why do I make this point on limitation? Because I have a friend at the university who teaches philosophy, teaches often courses in ethics. And so when he gets to questions on life issues, he used to in the past, he hasn't done it recently, but in the past he used to invite me in to give a kind of witness like I'm doing tonight. And there was one young man there probably 6 or 7 years ago that asked me, but does he recognize his limitation? And I said, I don't know, maybe, I really don't know. Never occurred to me to think about that. And I can say some 6 or 7 years later, in fact, he does recognize his limitations, just as we all recognize our limitations. And he'll say things like, he's no good at math, he can't spell, he's going to get an F on his test, he's in 5th grade, by the way. So all these kinds of things. But what's impressive about it is the limitation doesn't define it, because often the limitation defines us. Often we stop at our limitation. For him, this is not true. And so, I guess, so also I want to say something about this from the point of view of his siblings. So, when my second and third children, who are now 17 and 15, they were probably about 5 and 7. We were driving in a car, and often how they do, they're sitting in the back chatting away, and I'm not paying attention much to what they're saying. At a certain point, I hear the word Down syndrome. And as far as I know, we had never used this word in the family. I don't think. We could have, but I just don't remember. So it was the first time I really heard them say it, so my ears sort of pricked up. And I asked them, do you know what Down syndrome is? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, is there anything different about Carlo? And they're like, yeah. Like I was kind of really stupid, it's obvious. And I said, well, what's different? And they said, well, he's shorter than kids his age and doesn't speak as well. And I waited, and they didn't say anything else, and so I said, okay, anything else? And they said, no. And that was that. So a few weeks ago, when I was driving my daughter back from play practice, it was just the two of us in the car. So she was the one who was 5 at that time. She's now, I guess, 14 or 15. So I thought I would ask her the same question again. I said, is Carlo any different than any of your other brothers and sisters? And she said, no, he's just cuter. Okay, so again, it's often how we view the limitation. This becomes the stopping point, but for them it was never a problem, right? And the other thing that's very impressive, I show this picture of them playing soccer. Francesco, they're the older one, who's now 17, he's a very good soccer player. Michael, the one that's sort of behind Carlo there, is 9, he's a very good soccer player. And like all brothers, they like to play soccer together. And Carlo obviously can't compete with them. In fact, Michael's a much better soccer player than Carlo. But what's very impressive is Francesco is very intelligent. No one ever told him, no one ever suggested to him, but he's figured out a way that they have extremely competitive soccer teams. Francesco is always on Carlo's team, and they are so competitive that Michael throws all himself in there, competes, you can't believe how hard. Sometimes he'll win, sometimes he won't. But Carlo wants to play, right? So Carlo, even though he recognizes that he can't play as well as Michael, he can't play as well as other kids, but still, there's an incredible beauty in it, in the sense that this limitation doesn't, this is a physical limitation obviously, but it doesn't become the stopping point. Just a couple other pictures here. Here he's playing, what do you call it, Special Olympics. Here he is after he's scored. But anyway, so fast forward a few years, just a couple of years ago, we were coming back, me and my wife, from a dinner at a friend's house, where we were having a dinner with some friends of the Lejeune Foundation. And on the way back, my wife said, when Carlo was born, my question was, is it against me, against Donatella? And she said, I can say without a doubt now, no. She said, but now my question is different. Is it against him? And my immediate response to her was, how can you say such a thing? Simply look at him. Look at him. He doesn't know what's against him. He's happy. He's joyful. He's a normal kid, right? So this leads me to the second point, which is reality, or third point, reality. So here's Carlo, he's not so pleasant. But anyway, so my point here on reality is also reality can correct. So what I've learned in paying attention to Carlo is the way in which he stays in reality is a true way. So often we look at it as a wounded way. There is something true in that, right? There is. I'll give some concrete examples of what I mean by this, but he stays in reality in a simple way. Not simple in the sense of stupid, but in the true sense, right? Just pure. And I want to give a simple example of this, which is in 2009, we were on a vacation in Switzerland when we were there on sabbatical, and we were at dinner, and we were at a table with about 10 people, and eventually everyone left except for me and Carlo. We were sitting there, and they brought tiramisu. And this was the first time Carlo had ever seen or tasted tiramisu. So they placed tiramisu in front of him, and it was a pure joy, pure beauty to watch him eat tiramisu for the first time. I mean, he was discovering it in a way that was absolutely pure. And this immediately struck me because I was thinking, how do I normally eat tiramisu? I usually say, the other people got it first, the other person has a bigger piece, or my wife is better than this, or something like that. But for Carlo, this wasn't the problem. The only thing that was present at that moment was the tiramisu. But when it was over, that was that, right? He went on to something else. And then some other kind of silly examples here. Often when we go to Italy in the summer to visit my in-laws, he'll wake up day after day after day, and he'll ask the question, are we going to Italy today? And the answer is no. When are we going? 2 months, 3 months, whatever. Now, from one point of view, this is wounded, right? I mean, in the sense that normal people don't ask such a question. They know that, okay, today, if you told me no, we're not leaving today, we're leaving in 3 months, I'll ask you again in 3 months. But for him, he'll ask again tomorrow. So I guess my point in saying this is, there's also something true in it, in the sense that for him, what matters is the present. He doesn't live in the past, he doesn't live in the future. What matters is the present. And again, it's this example of eating a tiramisu as well. And then another example is when we were on a sabbatical in Italy, we went to visit an association of people with children with Down syndrome. And at a certain point, they wanted us to speak about our experience of educational system here in the United States with children with disabilities. And my wife is Italian, I'm not. I thought she would speak, but she's very shy, so she shoved me in front of the crowd and I began to speak. And at a certain point, this man who did not have a child with Down syndrome, she was older, probably around 20, very physically and mentally handicapped, he wheeled her into the back, and I was going on about, at this time Carlo was in first grade, so he was 6 years old, and this man at a certain point couldn't take it. I was just talking about preschool and these kinds of things. He just couldn't take it. And he asked me, what about when he's 18? And I said, I don't know, he's 6, I have no idea. So I went back to talking about 6. And after a couple minutes, the man just couldn't take it. His question wasn't about 6, it was about 18. So he asked me this question again. He said, excuse me, but what about when he's 18? And I said, I don't know. But I also don't know for myself. I don't know for my other children, Marta, Francesco, Veronica. I don't know. That's 12 years into the future. I don't know. So again, it's this question of living in the present. Now, let me give another example that will lead me into maybe the last point. Last Easter, we were at a friend's house for dinner, and another couple was there, and they have 5 children, and they were expecting their 6th. They just learned the news that they were expecting their 6th. And Carlo, in these kinds of situations, he doesn't know the other people very well. One of the families we know very well, the other one we didn't know so well. He's usually pretty shy. But for whatever reason, he was just an absolute ham. Because this other family, their children, the girls who are about his age, are very shy. And usually they clam up, but for whatever reason, Carlo was kind of a genius that night, and he was reciting poetry, dancing, singing, and he had everyone doing this, these girls. And the father was extremely moved by this because Carlo was able to get his girls to do things that he never thought they would do. And 2 weeks later, they learned they were going to have a child with Down syndrome. And what was very impressive to me was that this Easter dinner, when Carlo had no idea what he was doing, right? But in many ways, he was instrumental in helping this couple accept the news that they were going to expect a child with Down syndrome. So, I guess in terms of acceptance, it seems to me it requires time and attentiveness. The last point on affection. So, what's very impressive, and I don't know if this is true for all children, you often hear this is true for all children with Down syndrome, but the only way for Carlo to know is effectively. And it's a very impressive thing. Because again, going back to the point on limitation, often the limitation is our stopping point. For Carlo, it's not. And I'm going to give you a simple example of this. So in the fall, I saw him, he was writing, like we often had to do in school. When you do something wrong, you have to write sentences. Okay? So he was writing one which said, "Dear Mrs. Gersten, I am sorry for sticking out my tongue and wiggling at you in class." Okay, Mrs. Gersten is his aide that stays with him in class. Why do I bring up this example? Because for Carlo, normally the limitation could be the stopping point. It could be the rupturing of the relationship between him and Mrs. Gersten. But for Carlo, it wasn't, right? Carlo immediately wanted to reestablish the relationship. So to me, this was a very impressive thing. And the last example on this point of affection, when we were in Italy, and he was in first grade, again, he had an aide. We were in a public school there. There was an aide with him in school. And she was non-Christian, a very good woman. And at the end of the academic year, she wrote a letter to my wife. And basically what she said was, she said, "I've always wanted the best for all of the children that I've stayed with in class. That I've done all of my professional best. I think I've done a good job." And she said, "I've been told by my superiors, by all of my training, that I always have to remain detached. There has to be a detachment between me and the student." And she says, "I've always tried to do my best." But she said, this year it all came crumbling down with Carlo. And then I'm paraphrasing what she said. She essentially said, "He loved me and allowed me to love him." And this was a very impressive thing to me, because just after that was Holy Trinity Sunday, and Pope Benedict XVI, in describing the Trinity, said we've got to understand the Trinity, because in fact we're all made to love and to be loved. This was a very impressive thing to me, that this woman, who was non-Christian, was able to discover, staying with Carlo that year, this basic truth of life, right? That we're made to love and to be loved. And so, just a couple of other simple photos. So here he is with his brother Michael. Here he is with his entourage of girlfriends. But anyway, so in conclusion, I would simply like to say that for me, he's just a happy, normal, joyful kid, like any other kid. For sure, he has his problems, like everyone else has his problems, right? But for me, the thing that's beautiful about him is if you pay attention to him, you can discover truths of life in a way that I've understood so much about my other children, about myself, about my wife, in ways that I don't think I would have otherwise. So, and it seems to me, everyone seems to focus on the negative. So it's like that friend of ours who said, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." Instead, I think the truest judgment is the one of our friend who told my wife when he was first born, "Love him as he is, and he will be who he is." Or, in the words of Jerome Lejeune again, yeah, I think I have it here because I didn't. No, here it is. "Before God and men, we bear witness that for us every human being is a person." Thank you.